movement in anti-apartheid struggle, and their movements for non-racialism, teachings of comrades like Neville Alexander, was that it is exactly as I said, the call for that liberation is more than color of the skin. So what I think we should be learning from that experience is that in this moment that we have called for anti-racism and anti-sexism that has, is at force today, does not get captured and controlled to just turning it into black faces and or bus girls. That is not solving the problem. And I think I see the danger in this movement of so much, of not having the clarity that this movement is not about color of skin, it's about pigmentation, nor about the biological embodiment of whether you are a female or male. Frankly, when the bombs fall on Iran, it doesn't matter that it's a black woman behind it or not, or a white man. So these are dangers that I see in this moment, and I think we should be very careful. Another dimension of it is the calls for decolonizing education. That is the other points that this leads to. Our colleagues talk, and decolonization is not a metaphor, and I think that is very important. It is great that today we have in most US settings, they start their university or academic events with a land acknowledgement. In the recent ACSP, or American Collegiate Schools of Planning major conference, every panel started, every speaker started by acknowledging on land of Native Americans and Native populations that their university or from which they were speaking. Land acknowledgements, recognizing that we are on a stolen land in US is very important, but it's only a first step. At University of Illinois, for example, where we acknowledge we are on stolen land, we haven't changed to make free entrance and all costs of education for Native Americans. And the call for decolonizing education really is much more than that, is for transforming the kind of education that is not alienating to subordinate members of subordinate communities and people of indigenous descent, or what in US they call it people of color, which is a problematic term itself. I have written extensively on this, looking at the experience of South Africa, where moment of political liberation was also moment of economic liberalization. And I have written about a symbolic inclusion while we have material exclusion. And I want to, I share that concern for this moment, this kind of moment in US and the rest of the world where anti-racist and anti-sexism struggles are real and are rising and are important and need to be supported, but we need to also be very conscious of how capitalism loves, and that is what it does very well, is bringing the whatever is in its margin, folding it in. So for that reason, this anti-racist and anti-sexist movements could also be folded in by the oppressor, so we become implicated and entrenched in our own oppression by even accepting categories of Black, for example, something that, again, the Unity movement that Neville Alexander and Ken Solo have extensively established was a challenged category, right? To call oneself colored or Black, etc., was at forefront of anti-apartheid movement. In conclusion, thank you.
Thank you so much, Farnak. Okay, we're going to turn to our last speaker now, and then we'll have a chance to open up for discussion. So Ananya Roy will be our last speaker. Ananya, are you ready for your
I am ready, and if someone would give me screen sharing capacity, please. Good morning, everyone.
Hobson, could you give Ananya screen sharing, please?
Just a moment, please.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm so happy to be here this morning and to share a panel with wonderful colleagues and comrades, and many of my comments will build on those. And as soon as I can screen share, I will get started. I wish we were doing this in person. I should say that I'm going to invite you to think from Los Angeles, where it's still dark outside and still early in the morning. And we are going to think about a moment of tremendous crisis and insurgency in US cities. Okay.
I haven't seen you.
I still can't share my screen. I mean, I could do this without a PowerPoint, but I do think that the images tell a certain story.
Let's just ask, Hobson, is the screen sharing a problem, or do you think it will be manageable?
Just a moment, please.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Perfect. There you go. Thanks, Ananya.
Thank you so much. All right. I'm hoping you can all see the screen, and if not, just interrupt me and let me know if this stops working.
We can see it.
So my brief remarks this morning are titled Emergency Urbanism. And in it, I want to talk about the conjoined crisis that is at hand. And it's a crisis of not only the pandemic, but as has already been noted in this panel, of racial capitalism itself. So my argument today is that the COVID-19 pandemic has both exposed and deepened inequality, but also created a political terrain of struggle that is unusual. And to do so, I'm going to focus on the housing crisis in the US, particularly Los Angeles, and think about the moment at hand as one of potentially expanding housing justice. So the housing crisis, as you all know, is a crisis of persistent and deepening inequality. In January of this year, at the start of this new year, in Los Angeles, the country's most expensive home, which you see pictured here, went on the market with an asking price of $350 million, down from $500 million, which was its original price. At the same time, during that same month, 165 people experiencing homelessness died on the streets of Los Angeles from the rain and the cold. There are, in fact, 70,000 unhoused Angelenos in LA County. They are disproportionately Black, making homelessness a scene of Black death and Black dispossession. And I'll just give you one glimpse of that. The life expectancy of an unhoused woman in Los Angeles is 48 years. And the life expectancy of an unhoused man in Los Angeles today is 51 years. If we heard those numbers about some other country, you know the ways in which we would frame that. The ways in which I like to think about homelessness in Los Angeles and elsewhere is by borrowing a term from Lisa Maricacho to think about racialized rightlessness. So what we're looking at here, of course, is the systematic unhousing of people through racial segregation and discrimination. We are talking about a long history of the disinvestment in public housing and an investment in forms of urban development such as gentrification that displaces people. But we are also talking about civil death, social death, and actual death through the violent and persistent criminalization of poor others, especially the unhoused, including the deployment of massive police resources in cities like Los Angeles to criminalize poverty on behalf of business improvement districts and associations of propertied citizens. So it is with this in mind that with the onset of the pandemic, the Institute on Inequality and Democracy, for which I serve as director, started paying close attention to the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic promised to greatly expand this crisis that already existed. Along with Professor Gary Blasey, who is Professor Emeritus of Law at UCLA, we started outlining the scale and scope of the crisis to come. The numbers are here. I should say that there are about 10 million people in LA County. So we are anticipating that 495,000 renter households face eviction in LA when the eviction courts reopen. The scale of this mass displacement will, of course, be greater than anything we have seen in recent times, except perhaps indigenous genocide and dispossession. So this, in fact, will be greater than even the Great Depression. Needless to say, this kind of crisis to come does not affect everyone equally. And so a lot of the research that my colleagues have been doing and that we have been doing at the Institute is to show the ways in which vulnerability is concentrated in the Black and brown neighborhoods of the city, how already the housing crisis was primarily borne by Black, brown, and indigenous households, and now, of course, will greatly impact those very same households. This is a geography of race and class, to put it bluntly. But I also want to give you a sense of what this looked like before COVID-19 pandemic. Wants me like those life expectancy numbers. In 2018, the Economic Roundtable, which produces really robust research on these issues, showed that 600,000 renters in Los Angeles pay 90% or more of their income on rent. 90% or more of their income on rent. So that was already the scale of the crisis, but I also want to be clear that as we have already seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis at hand is always an opportunity for deepening inequality. So in the US, the COVID-19 pandemic has been an opportunity for the tremendous expansion of wealth by the country's billionaires, particularly the tech billionaires. The work we've been doing at the Institute, including in this report on housing grabs, predicts that in cities, there will be a massive grab, if you will, of land and housing stock by corporate entities, including corporate landlords and equity firms. We argue that this happened during the Great Recession, where there was an unregulated acquisition of distressed properties, and that this will happen again, and it's going to happen primarily in the Black and brown working class neighborhoods of the city. So this is the emergency that is in the title, Emergency Urbanism, but this emergency is conjoined with the ongoing emergency that is racial capitalism in the United States. And in particular, I'm drawing on the meaning of emergency that Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter uprising and movement, has drawn our attention to. And that emergency is the death-making apparatus of police and prison. So in a well-known speech in 2015, but how the state of emergency was about the systematic targeting of Black people dying. She used the language not being able to take another breath, which in many ways previewed what we were to see with George Floyd's killing and many other killings. So as these